AA Battery presents a film by Ashley and Becca.
How we collected our data. Data was collected from approximately 400 students who were asked to record their heart rate before and after performing certain activities. They were only asked questions regarding their weight, age, if they smoked, and exercised regularly. The students collected data both in the laboratory and outside as well. The heart rate was recorded before and after activities such as taking exams, walking at a fast rate, riding a stationary bike, drinking coffee, drinking soda, and driving in traffic. The data was input into an Excel spreadsheet for us to analyze and form a conclusion for our hypothesis.
Our first hypothesis is people who smoke will have a greater percent heart rate change than non-smokers after riding a bike for 5 minutes.
We collected the data for the percent change heart rate after riding a bike for 5 minutes for non-smokers and the same data for people who do smoke. We found that people who did smoke had a greater heart rate change, however that change was minimal at a 3% difference.
Our conclusion to our first hypothesis was that we found that there was a 3% difference between non-smokers and smokers. We were correct in hypothesizing that smokers would have a greater change in heart rate after riding a bike for 5 minutes than non-smokers. However, just as we had stated on the graph, that change was fairly minimal.
Hypothesis number 2. People who smoke and drink coffee will have a greater percent heart rate change than people who don't smoke or drink coffee after riding a bike for 5 minutes. We took all the data collected from students who were asked if they drank coffee and if they smoked cigarettes. We then chose the heart rate experiment when the students were asked to record their heart rate before and after riding a stationary bike for 5 minutes. We sorted the data and were able to find an average percent increase in the heart rate for both groups, smokers who drank coffee and non-smokers and non-coffee drinkers. There was a 2% difference between the two groups, that the smoking coffee drinkers did have a greater heart rate change than non-smoking coffee drinkers.
Our conclusion to hypothesis number 2 was that we found that there was a 2% change in the heart rate between people who smoke and drink coffee and non-smokers who don't drink coffee. Our hypothesis was correct by saying people who drink coffee and smoke will have a greater heart rate change. However, that change was also fairly minimal.
Were our ideas consistent? We think that the data for each graph was so close together because there were far fewer smokers in this study than non-smokers. If this study were performed on a larger scale, we think that the difference between the two would be much greater, with the smokers having a higher heart rate change. Conclusion of both hypotheses. After analyzing our data for both graphs, we concluded that both hypotheses were correct, but that the data may be somewhat skewed and that the difference between smokers and non-smokers and smokers who drink coffee and non-smoking non-coffee drinkers should be much greater. The difference, however, would still favor our hypotheses.